Hey everyone, I hope you guys are enjoying Monster Hunter in whichever fashion you're choosing to play it as. And today I wanted to hold a little bit of a discussion topic regarding a lot of the recent discussions I've seen, not just in social media, but also some of the subreddits as well and some of the forum discussions regarding the potential reveal that people have started to talk themselves into regarding a Monster Hunter remake, maybe specifically a Monster Hunter 1 remake specifically, after some people took the 20th anniversary revealed kind of like set of images that we got to see, where essentially, of course, you get to see all of the previous flagship monsters and armors kind of get revealed throughout the years, and then it kind of circles back to the original Hunter, essentially with the original armor from back in the day, which of course has been part of many recent versions of Monster Hunter as of right now. This has begun to kind of spin off a lot of discussion regarding the potential reveal, according to them, that Capcom would consider doing a full-on remaster at the very least of Monster Hunter 1. And in this video I kind of wanted to have a discussion as to just basically say why I don't think that's a very realistic situation, or how terrible that actually would be for Monster Hunter, because it just, the lack of content that would be available in a full-on remake of the first game would just be incredible, to the point that people would just be kind of like scratching their head. Maybe it sounds good in theory, but at the end of the day, once they actually get their hands on it, it probably wouldn't necessarily work, and they would be upset, and reviews I don't think would be favorable to those kind of games. And I guess I kind of want to use Monster Hunter Now as an example, because Monster Hunter Now, I had a couple of people kind of be critical of my thoughts on the game in general, while I've not put out a proper review, only because I've just not really been playing it all that much, to be quite honest. Although I do play it occasionally, there's just not enough content in that game to kind of keep me interested. And it's also the fact there's a mobile game, but I disregard that altogether. I'm just not really hooked on the game experience as of right now, because there's just not a lot of content in that game. I know they recently had the Black Diablos event or whatever, but in general, there's just not really much there to kind of keep me interested or engaged playing it throughout long stretches of time. And I think that's kind of like the basis that I wanted to kind of base this discussion of, where players, not myself included, but many players have been complaining that Monster Hunter Now is the way that it launched, and the way that they're just not providing many updates, or even, talking about a next major batch of content dropping in December. It's just not necessarily keeping people engaged, to the point that a lot of people are kind of taking their time away and moving on to something else, and they'll eventually come back to it, which is more than fair than enough. And it gets us to a full-on reveal of a potential Monster Hunter 1 remake, remaster type thing, where you have to remember that the first game, if I remember correctly, when it comes to areas, only had access to a handful of them. I believe it was the forest, hills, jungles, the desert, the swamp, volcano, and of course some of the arenas, the fortress and the castle Shrade. Then of course you had the settlements back in Kokoto village and Minegar town, if I remember correctly, as well. But when it came to the actual monster lists of the first Monster Hunter game, boy was it actually sparse. Of course, you had smaller monsters like the Apnotom, the Bullfango, the felines, and Velociprays, but then when it came to actual big monsters, I believe we're looking at somewhere around 15 or so in general. Basarios, Cephadrome, Diablos, Fatalis, Gendrome, Gravius, Gypseros, Rathalos, Plesaroth, Monoblos, Lao Shanglung, Kirin, Kezu, Eardrome, Rathian, Velocidrome, and Yatkutku. So I believe that was somewhere in the neighborhood of like 17 or so monsters, roughly speaking. Not that many. And just, there's a reason why this franchise has been iterative. They kind of like build up, from the original game and move up from there. And to say that they're gonna just rebuild a PlayStation 2 game from the ground up or remaster it, I guess it would have to be a full-on remake. It wouldn't necessarily have to be a remaster. I mean, that would be a lot of work, and it probably wouldn't necessarily look all that great. So it would have to be a full-on remake with a handful of areas, not that many that are actually fully explorable, They're very limited to the actual comparison versions that we ended up getting in later versions of those games, specifically the 3DS and Vita games. And then to talk about the fact that there's just not that many monsters, it kind of ikins back to my original point with Monster Hunter Now, where there just wasn't that much content there. But it doesn't actually end there. When it came to weapons, I believe we're only looking at 7 original weapons in that game: the Great Sword, the Sword and Shield, the Dual Blades, Hammer, Lance, Light Bowgun, and Heavy Bowgun. So there wasn't a bow. Of course, there wasn't an Insect Grave, Switch Axe, or any of the other weapons, even Gun Lance for that matter, wasn't there. So it's just a very limited experience that you would be able to get there in the very first Monster Hunter game. Now, to be completely fair, the expansion, or at the very least Freedom, I believe it was the PSP version of the first generation game, or the kind of like handheld version of the original game, did kind of expand things a little bit. Weapons wise, I believe it was the same 7 or so weapons. I think they originally added the Battlegrounds map to that in the very first actual arena, with the Great Arena as well. So they did add a couple of new areas there, and the large monster list was a little bit better. I believe we're looking at about 31 monsters in general: Bazarios, Cephadrome, Diablos, Black Diablos, Fatalis, Crimson Fatalis, Gendrome, Gravias, Black Gravias, Gypceros, Purple Gypceros, Irondrome, Khezu, Red Khezu, Kirin, Lao Shan Lung, Ashen Lao Shan Young, Monoblos, White Monoblos, Plesioth, Green Plesioth, Rathalos, Azure Rathalos, Silver Rathalos, Rathian, Pink Rathian, Gold Rathian, Velocidrome, Scarred Yangaruga, Yankuku, and Blue Yankuku. So yeah, a lot of subspecies of the same monster kind of thing. Nothing necessarily new there, but it does pad the roster at the end of the day. And it does make me wonder, well, how would people actually, let's say they did, for sake of argument, they don't want to do the first one, but let's say they do Monster Hunter Freedom, full-on remake, a full-on remaster, whatever you want to call it, whatever you want to look at it, and they just give you 7 weapons, 5-6 new maps or remakes of those maps, and 31 monsters available. And there's no DLC, there's no post-launch content, there's none of that, right? There's just a fully priced game at those setups. With that level of content, I should say, I don't think that would have fared relatively well for the Monster Hunter community that is constantly hungry for more content. You have to put it in perspective, where you had people counting every single monster that Rise and Sunbreak ended up getting post-launch, by the numbers, in comparison to World and Iceborne. Some people would just simply say that World, forget mechanics aside, forget visuals, forget performance, all of that, pull that aside. The fact that World and Iceborne had X amount of monsters means that it's better than Rise and Sunbreak. And that's all they care about. They don't care about aesthetic, they don't care about gameplay, they don't care about the experience, they don't care about visuals. They just care about raw numbers of content, or however many hours they were able to put on their character. And when it comes to a remake of any one of these games, whether it's Gen 1, 2, 3, 4, I don't necessarily think it's really going to hold up all that well, because the content isn't necessarily there. Now, of course, this is a discussion topic. I do want to hear your guys' feedback on this, but I think a lot of people would probably recognize, yes, it certainly sounds like a good idea, but then what do you end up doing with the separated maps, for example? Everyone's gotten used to just one universal map being available. Would people be willing to kind of have segmented maps all over again? Some of the slower mechanics? Probably not. A lot of people wouldn't want to go back to that. They would be like, wow, these games were not necessarily all that much fun because they were so slow and thematic. Again, they have been speeding up the franchise throughout. The lack of content not necessarily being there, would that be something that people will be willing to put up with? I don't necessarily think they would. So in theory and paper and in social media, where everyone seems to want something, but when it actually gets released, they don't necessarily care all that much. I want to use F-Zero as an example right now. The F-Zero 99 reveal in the last Nintendo Direct, people were actually mad that they ended up getting an F-Zero 99 instead of just being grateful that Nintendo acknowledged a franchise, which according to social media and different forums and subreddits, they have been saying that F-Zero needed to come back for the last 5 years since the Switch was revealed, or the last 7 years at this point. And they were just mad that it ended up being a, battle royale game essentially. So, I don't necessarily think Capcom would be willing to do a remake of a Generation 1, whether it is the base Monster Hunter or Freedom for that matter. I don't think they'd be willing to do that, only because it feels like they're already kind of doing that with Monster Hunter now. And again, the only downside is that it's on mobile devices, but they are trying to do something pretty much very similar to a full-on relaunch from the ground up experience with limited content, and hopefully, if the audience is there, build from there. And again, my argument to the Monster Hunter Now situation is, well, hopefully to them, people hold out till December, because otherwise, I don't think the audience is going to be there. But that's pretty much all I wanted to bring up regarding a Monster Hunter 1 remake, remaster type of situation. I've seen a lot of people talking about it. I certainly want to hear your guys' feedback on this, because to me, it all boils down to the number of content, monsters, weapons, maps. That's all people care about. The story is irrelevant when it comes to Monster Hunter. We all know that. And I don't necessarily think it would hold up relatively well in the long term, which is what Capcom wants. They want to release a game that is going to hold up for a year or two before their next mainline game. And I don't necessarily think they're going to be able to invest that money to make a remake or a remaster and have it just kind of like die out within a couple of months. But do let me know what you guys think. If you're brand new to my channel, though, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Hit the bell to receive notifications when the videos go up. And as always, thank you so much for watching. See ya.